Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to welcome you to today's session on the first part of the solar myths. I would like to thank the International Solar Alliance and the Clean Energy Solutions Center who facilitate this webinar series. Some background from me. Before I joined NetFactor in 2010, I have been Director for Policies and Finance at the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. Previously, as a Spanish civil servant, I have been involved in many national and European regulations for the promotion of renewable energies and energy efficiencies. This training is part of Module 6 on socioeconomics, aspects of solar energy, and focuses on debunking the solar myths. In this lecture, we will, as always, start with a brief description and definition of what solar myths are, and afterwards jump into the main body of the presentation. Don't forget that at the end of the presentation, you will be given the chance to test your knowledge with a little quiz. The learning objective, which this module aims to provide, can be divided into two. An understanding of the myths and misconceptions of solar energy, and an overview of the main myths around solar energy, both solar thermoelectric, or CSP, concentrated solar power, and photovoltaics. Public concerns on solar energy can be primarily classified into two groups: those which may be legitimate to address and those based on misconceptions about the technology. For the legitimate concerns, even though solar energy can support the mitigation of adverse environmental and social impacts originated from conventional energy production and consumption, it is still important to pinpoint that very large-scale deployment may also generate negative impacts and externalities. Those impacts can vary significantly, not only among technologies, photovoltaic or concentrated solar power, but also according to geographical locations. Due to the decentralized nature, photovoltaic installations may face more difficulties in controlling some impacts, such as those related to end-of-life treatment of equipment and components. Misconceptions or myths. A misconception or myth is a view or an opinion made based on false understanding or interpretation of the particular phenomenon. The basis of this group of public concerns can be further distinguished between an intentional misinterpretation and intentional misinformation. An intentional misinterpretation is largely a result of knowledge gaps, which may be arising when solar energy is not communicated properly to the public due to the lagging in quality or amount of information. People may believe low-quality information from unprofessional and unreliable sources, which may look relatively easy or convenient to understand, while factual information may be communicated in an unclear or unnecessarily complex way to the audience so that they cannot or are not willing to take it. Misconceptions also originate from intentional misinformation, which may be provided by vested interest, who create poorly rooted claims and histories that mislead scientific evidence. They may do cherry-picking of evidence while not showing a full spectrum of facts. Extensive efforts for proliferating false claims via different media could create chaos and balance in decision-making. The main body of this lecture is divided into two parts. We will begin with the myths about concentrated solar power and continue with myths on photovoltaics. Myths. Concentrated solar power is too expensive and it will always be so. The fact is that prices for electricity produced by today's CSP plant fill the range from 12 to 16 cents euro per kilowatt hour, depending on the irradiation level and most importantly on the financing conditions. A remarkable cost reduction around 50% has been achieved by CSP since 2007, with only approximately 4.5 gigawatts installed worldwide. Compared with the current situation of wind, 350 gigawatts, and PV, 130 gigawatts at the end of 2017, one can easily figure out the real potential for cost reduction in the next years of CSP plants. Although CSP plants are more capital intensive than traditional fossil fuel plants, their operating costs, once connected to the grid, are low, essentially because sunshine is for free. They will continually decrease over the coming years due to the announced cutting-edge technology development. The result will be that cost optimization, economies of scale, and after deployment of large plants, around 250 megawatts, are expected to further reduce the cost below 10 cents of euro per kilowatt hour by 2020. This means that solar thermal electricity, or concentrated solar power, will be competitive against coal and gas-fired power before 2025. However, as today, the cost of electricity produced by CSP plants is lower than the one generated by currently announced new nuclear power plants. In other words, concentrated solar power or solar thermoelectric technologies are much more economically feasible compared with new fossil fuel plants and their respective effective over the lifetime of the plant. Myth: CSP plants are an intermittent way of generating electricity. The fact is that CSP plants are today, in most cases, equipped with a heat storage system. During sunny hours, the collected solar energy is used not only to provide steam to the turbine, but also to charge the thermal storage tank. Then, after sunset or during cloudy periods, the energy can be drawn from the storage tank to deliver energy on demand. Normally, the solar fields and the tanks are designed to cover 4 to 7 hours of operation. But there is already a reference plant, Gema Solar in Spain, that can produce electricity continuously during the summer season, day and night, just like baseload nuclear power plants. From a system perspective, due to its built-in thermal storage capability, solar thermal energy, or CSP, offers significant advantage over other renewable energy sources. Furthermore, the hybridization with biomass or natural gas enhances the firmness of the delivery of solar thermal electricity to markets and grid operators. Myth: CSP is not a mainstream energy source in Europe. According to the 2014 edition of the International Energy Agency Technology Roadmap for CSP, the estimated production of CSP reached about 1,000 terawatt-hour by 2030 and 4,380 terawatt-hour by 2050, thus providing 4% of the electricity mix in Europe and 11% of global electricity mix. In other words, this will be a significant share in the energy mix. As we have seen in previous chapter, until 2017, main markets for concentrated solar power were Spain and United States of America, while now new markets are moving into regions with higher number of solar hours during the year. With only 4.5 gigawatts until 2017, CSP technologies were relatively new to other energy technologies. However, CSP has a considerable potential in terms of electricity generation. In a small part of North Africa and Middle East, the MENA territory, could meet the electricity demand of Europe. The Middle East and the North African countries are the new market now for concentrated solar power, in particularly Morocco. There is also great potential for CSP plants still in Southern Europe. For instance, in Spain, there exists today 50 plants with a total of 2.3 gigawatts connected to the grid currently, producing 4 terawatt-hours per year. So CSP represents already 3% of the electricity in Spain. Assuming an important capital cost reduction and the contribution of energy storage, the International Energy Agency suggests that CSP could become economically competitive for intermediate and peak loads within the current decade due to the reduced cost of solar thermoelectric and increased price in not only fossil fuels, but also CO2. This will bring these technologies mainstream. Myth: support programs for CSP deployment are expensive and inefficient for the economy of the countries. The fact is that CSP investment creates more than 10 times more employment and social wealth per megawatt than the same investment in fossil fuel power generation. Investment in CSP plants bring high macroeconomic benefits to countries that go for it. Due to its high local economic content, therefore CSP industry brings great contribution to the country GDP during both the construction and the operation of the plants. In terms of direct job creation, the CSP industry has created jobs from manufacturing and engineering to construction works through Europe and Asia and North America, and will continue doing so as the global CSP market is set to reach up to 130 billion euros per year, according to the International Energy Agency Technology Roadmap for Concentrated Solar Power. Based on the figures estimated by the International Energy Agency, from 40 to 57 billion of euros will be invested on average every year between 2015 and 2030, creating 275,000 to 520,000 jobs worldwide. Up to 150,000 qualified jobs are at stake alone in Europe. Through these 15 years, covering a wide spectrum of direct activities related to engineering, development and financing, manufacturing of components of reflectors, receivers, etc. Construction, civil installation, and commissioning works are also creating local jobs. In addition to such direct activities, the CSP industry will, in this case, also create numerous indirect jobs: research, training, transport, information and communication activities, general maintenance. The returns of all kinds of tax incomes, avoided unemployment subsidies, avoided fuel inputs, avoided CO2 emission rights, are in any contemplated timeframe along the lifetime of the plan higher than still necessary, but decreasing premiums to fill the initial gap with the current electricity prices. As report from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory estimates that investing in 100 megawatts of concentrated solar power generates 4,000 direct and indirect jobs, GRs, plus 94 permanent jobs, and $628 million in economic output, compared to 330 jobs plus 13 permanent jobs and 47 million economic output for an identical investment in natural gas fuel power plant. Myth: CSP plants disrupt landscape. The fact: CSP power plants tend to be located at abandoned industrial sites on rural land and in desert to lower the impact of land use and land disturbance. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. For someone of CSP power plant may look as a giant art project, and we in the industry do feel it indeed so. Others may not think the same. All this is, at the end, largely a matter either of opinion, interest, or taste. More objectively, parabolic through plants are difficult to be perceived as visually disruptive in landscape, since the collector are not high and spread over a large area. The tower in CSP tower plants can be seen from far away, a little similar to a lighthouse. When in operation, the view of sun rays concentrated in the receiver is appreciated by most people. Myth: CSP power plants need too much land. The fact is that the electricity yield of solar technologies per unit of land is in the order of magnitude of other technologies. Moreover, CSP makes great use of the desert abundant solar resource. A relatively modest amount of desert land will be enough to supply our planet with energy. According to a study performed in 2003, 2,400,000 terawatt-hour per year using 1% of each of the world desert. Myth: CSP plants need much water. The fact is that CSP plants require less water per hectare than agricultural activities, as this was assessed in the south of Spain. Compared with conventional fossil or nuclear technology, this statement does not hold true. It is true that water resources are often scarce in the Sunbelt regions where dry cooling towers can be used for cooling the condenser of the steam cycle. Solar fields can be also integrated in existing thermal power plants, coal or gas, reducing immediately gas consumption emissions will reduce water needs. Moreover, solar thermoelectric power for seawater desalination is possible and makes sense on many sites. Solar fields can be designed besides electricity generation also to produce high temperature heat to be used for industrial heating, production of synthetic fuels, and hence oil recovery and refineries. The combined production of electricity, heat, and desalinated water is of particular interest in arid regions where solar thermoelectric can provide electricity for reverse osmosis or heat for power desalination. Myth. CSP is not the mature technology and thus not reliable. CSP plants have proven their reliability since the 80s. As the first commercial scale application, the solar energy generating system with 9 separate sites continue to operate and produce 300 megawatts of installed capacity, enough to power nearly 250,000 homes at peak production. In other words, CSP plants have a lifetime of more than 30 years with minimum performance losses. 2,300 megawatts were being installed in Spain since 2007 in 50 different plant locations. They provide reliable electricity when matched perfectly with the demand curve. The maturity and reliability of the huge two-tank molten salt storage technology since 2008 a matter of evidence with daily charging and discharging processes without any incident. On many days during the summer 2014, solar thermoelectric plants supplied more than 10% of the demand, and many days of the summer 2014, the total daily contribution was over 5% of the demand in Spain, with the same reliability as any other conventional source. Taking into account the great potential, the macroeconomic benefits, and the contribution of renewable energy sources integration, solar thermoelectric, as the sole dispatchable technology, deserves further support in the coming years. Csp Industry Is Failing. Myth. The fact is that Csp industry is rather booming worldwide. Since 2010, generation of solar thermal electricity from Csp plant has grown strongly worldwide. According to International Energy Agency, the prospects for the development of Csp plants are extremely high. The forecast of Csp plant production could reach about 100 terawatts by 2030 and almost 4,500 terawatt-hour by 2050 at world level. That's providing 4% of the electricity mix in Europe and 11% of global electricity mix. We have seen how in the last 2 years, the market has expanded from an initial 10-year phase where all the plants were concentrated either in Spain or in North America. And in the last 2 years, the number of countries with new Csp plants has increased in Australia, China, India, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, Oman, and South Africa, to mention a few. And today, the market has reached 6.2 gigawatts. Myth. Csp is very complex technology. The fact is that Csp power plant is not that complex, although Csp plants are like mechanical watches with many parts and components to be optimized. The electrical part of the Csp plants use common, simple, conventional power generation part and devices, just solar field as specific. Myth. Csp plant endanger wildlife. The fact is that there is no case about endangering wildlife at all, and the news all over the country related to birds' death are exaggerated. However, recently there seems to be some misleading and exaggerated news in the United States about bird death associated with concentrated solar power plants, especially the story about a new solar project in California killing up to 28,000 birds per year by reflected light, which is based on a number of uncertain assumptions. In fact, the power plant reported 321 total avian fatalities between January and June 2014, on which 133 were related to reflected sunlight, thus falling far short of the estimate in those criticized, according to NRG Energy Company. In 2015, a concentrated solar plant in Bapa killed about 7 birds per gigawatt-hour of electricity produced, or more than 6,000 birds estimated over the course of a year. In reality, the impact of CSP or other renewable energy sources in power generation on bird deaths has been largely overblown. So what do these numbers mean compared to other sources of bird deaths? For example, in the US, every year cats kill between 1.4 and 3.7 billion birds, windows nearly 1 billion, cats some 60 million. The mining and burning of coal nearly 8 million. If killing birds have to be avoided at all costs, then windows, pet cats, and roads should be first prohibited. Moreover, this may happen only to tower technology, which is less than 10% of the standard CSP power in the world, and it's not the case for parabolic through. Myth: countries may be better off starting off a CSP program later. The fact is that a support program for CSP will provide immediate positive return to the economy of any given country in terms of GDP increase, employment, and taxes, right from the starting up of the construction phase, while the first premiums will be paid some years later. The European Solar Thermoelectric Stella Association has performed simulations for different countries which show that their returns to the economy will be always greater than the corresponding premiums. The golden era has also to be taken into consideration. The golden era is the time when the support program ends and the cost of the electricity produced will be the operational maintenance cost only, without necessity of repowering the unit. Besides this, the local content delivery during the construction of the plant will be increasing with the time and widened CSP programs. Therefore, an ambitious country can reach a point where new CSP plants can be deployed without any further country support. This means that the country that started the support program earlier will be in a position for grasping further benefits by building the plants with a local content delivery close to 80%, while others may start later the CSP program, but with most of the supplies still coming from abroad. Additionally, such countries with an ambitious CSP program will no doubt enjoy an additional first-mover advantage in the region and become an exporter to the neighboring countries. Myth: CSP companies alone, their whole value chain, are making huge profits due to incentive measures, feeding tariffs or feeding premiums. The fact is that, as CSP plants have high capex, most of them were financed with a high leverage, so that the banks are the entities that currently make most profit from the CSP deployment. On the contrary, the companies took high risks associated with large investment, either for building up manufacturing units for specific CSP components or for the construction of the plants. In Spain, the profit and loss accounts of the plant's holders saw very small positive results until they had to face aggressive retroactive cuts in their income, putting the owners of the plants at free, revealing thus several shortcomings of current national and European legislation related to investor protection. We will now address the second part of the main body of the presentation, which is devoted to the myths about solar photovoltaic technology. Myth: the space requirement of solar panel system is too high. The fact is that it is not necessary to provide large contiguous areas for a solar panel system. The advantage of the photovoltaic solar energy is the possibility of the decentralization. Roof, house fronts, noise protection walls, canopies of traffic routes, etc. can be used, therefore there are no area problems. In the average household consumes about 10,400 kWh per year, and we assume 250 watts solar panel, we can use the high and low panel production ratios to calculate how many solar panels are needed on average. Thus, the typical homeowner will need between 28 and 34 solar panels to cover 100% of their energy use. Myth: the output of a solar power PV system is not sufficient for the large power consumers. The fact is that with a centralized power supply, a large number of solar PV plants provide the required power. Photovoltaic solar power can be collected centrally through the power grid and then can be provided with sufficient power centrally. Myth: the conditions for solar PV plants are good only in southern countries, where the sun shines sufficiently. The fact is that also in Central Europe and North America, the conditions for solar PV plants are good. Photovoltaics work both with direct radiation and diffuse sun. Solar panels use light, not heat, to generate electricity. In fact, when the solar panels are cooler, they are better able to conduct electricity. Germany is one of the leaders for solar PV capacity per inhabitant. Myth: solar power is worthless because it only occurs when the sun shines. The fact is that solar PV system provides electricity not only direct sunlight but also from a bright sky. Even during the day, there is a higher demand on the electricity grid, peak pricing hours. Photovoltaic solar power, which is fed into the utility grid, contributes to cover the peak loads at midday. Heavy usage of electricity in peak consumption periods will be more expensive. It is not just a matter of replacing conventional power plants with photovoltaic solar power, but solar electricity reduces CO2 emissions. Every kilowatt of solar power, which is fed into the grid, saves around 1 kilogram of CO2, depending on the country. When replacing conventional power plants, there is an energy mix of different renewable energy sources. The sun provides energy mainly on summer days, but from the wind in winter and half of the year. Batteries enjoy great importance in the future because it stores the surplus powers and can bridge the barriers without the sun. Myth: solar panel needs solar tracker system to follow the sun during the day. The fact is that the solar panels are always oriented to the sun, which coincides with the hours of higher solar radiation. Nevertheless, installing a solar tracker will increase the power output. Myth: high environmental impact by chlorine chemistry and problems in disposal. The fact is that photovoltaic solar cell consists of non-toxic silicon, the second most widely used element of the Earth's surface. Chlorine is only used when cleaning silicon. It takes place in closed cycles. The finished product, the photovoltaic solar cell, does not include chlorine compounds. Myth: solar PV system cause additional electric smog. The fact is that electric smog is a collective term for high-frequency electromagnetic waves. However, electromagnetic waves are not created through direct current. Photovoltaic solar cells produce direct current, but this current is just in the solar power inverter converted into the standing alternative current. Anyone who wants to protect themselves from electromagnetic waves should give the DC direct current cables of the solar PV system into the solar, and from there the direct current will be converted into alternative current. Besides, grounded rooftop solar PV panels protect against electric smoke from above. Myth: photovoltaic generated electricity is more costly than electricity generated from fossil fuel or nuclear power electricity. Photovoltaics, unlike other power generation, can only survive with subsidies. The fact is that the rapid deployment of solar PV, working in combination with high learning rates, for every doubling of cumulative installed capacity, PV module cost decline by 20-22%, has led to a dramatic cost declines in the last 10 years. Crystalline silicon PV modules prices have fallen by more than 80% since 2010, driving reductions in installed costs. Utility-scale solar PV projects can now produce electricity that is competitive with other grid supply options without any financial support. Myth: solar cells require more energy for the production that they generate. The fact is that, under the most trying condition, it takes no more than 3 years of operation of solar cells to pay back the energy that goes into making them. As they will last for many decades, their energy payback is extremely short. Myth: solar panel will cause the roof to leak, deteriorate, or collapse. The fact is that solar panel actually protects and preserves the portion of the roof they cover. If there is ever a problem with the roof that needs to be repaired, panels can easily be removed. Most solar panels are not attached directly to the roof itself, but rather to a mounted railing system. Myth: solar panels need constant maintenance. The fact is that photovoltaic solar panels are manufactured to be outdoors and withstand adverse weather conditions for many years. Its manufacture is strong, and for this reason, the manufacturers offer guarantees of many years in the panel. Its maintenance is minimal and will be limited to clean dust and dirt on the surface of the solar panel once a year and check that the solar cables are still well connected. Concluding remarks. We can now conclude that vested interest from the conventional energy company has fed citizens with misinformation about solar energy technologies. Myths about solar energy persist due to the efforts of the conventional industry to reinforce these myths, the complexity of the topic not always easy for the citizen, and the lack of a strategy from solar industry to communicate better. 3. Myths on solar energy are related with many aspects: reliability, economic, environmental concerns, etc. There are facts to debunk these myths. And 4th, last but not least, legitimate concerns have been addressed by solar community by applying good practices to reduce potential damage. But at this point, we came to the end of the module on solar myths. I would like to thank you for your attention. As before, you are invited to the test to test your understanding of the contents in the following small quiz.